First, I have to say, looking back at your background, I find it really amazing because you really had a lot of different things in your career. You've been a hospital administrator, you've been a doctor, you've been a clinical researcher, so forth, and now with Express Scripts. And there aren't that many people who take jobs, and I hope it wasn't that you got bored of one and moved on to that. But could you comment a little bit about how that particular mixture of experience is really quite different? I mean, it's very different to be a hospital administrator than to be the chief medical officer at Express Scripts. How that has influenced sort of your career and what you do today.
Yeah, so you're being very generous, but I view it as I'm becoming increasingly evil with time. So I started out as a very virtuous person, a physician, doing taking care of patients. To be very frank, my ambition was to be actually a veterinarian, and I didn't think I could get into vet school. And so, being from a Jewish family, my mother, of course, kept encouraging me to go to medical school. And back when I was in high school, there were these 6-year medical schools. And so she forced me to apply to a 6-year medical school. I knew I wasn't going to get in. Unfortunately, I did get in, and so there went vet school. And so I thought, and I told them, they asked, what do you want to be? I said, I want to be a primary care doctor in a rural setting, which, there's going to be nothing further from what I am. So I started out very virtuous. I did a cardiology research fellowship, an oncology research fellowship, a nephrology research and clinical fellowship, and a transplant fellowship. And so I had a lot of different experiences. I could have stayed in training forever, but my wife, who's much better than the two of us, made me stop. My wife is the chairman of medicine at Washington University, so she runs one of the largest departments in healthcare in the United States, and it's my much better half. I was in basic science, doing drug discovery. I actually hold a bunch of patents with biotech companies. If any of them had ever worked, I wouldn't be shilling for Express Scripts today. But I did get drug into clinical trial twice. And then I started a business by accident for Washington University. As a kidney doctor, all the money's in dialysis. My dialysis business became the largest in the state of Missouri after 3 years. So the school thought I knew something about healthcare finances, which I didn't. But this is part of the problem with healthcare is I became the chief medical officer for Washington University, the first to ever do it. They put me in charge of the practice plan, which is a $500 million practice. I mean, this is insanity. So I was in charge of contracting, registration, billing, and collections for the 5th largest practice in the United States with no training. I forced them to send me back to get my MBA, so I got my MBA, then became the vice president of the whole medical center and becoming progressively more evil, and then 10 years ago, moved to Express Scripts, which makes me the Darth Vader of healthcare, and I don't know where I'm headed off to my own Death Star sometime.
Yeah, is there another set that's more evil?
I'm trying to figure it out. Maybe I'll join the next administration.
Well, one of my favorite questions for the keynote speakers in these Fireside is to go back and look and say, when you're growing up and through your life, are there any things that were really a personal passion, and how has that related to you? Example, last year, Brent Saunders, the CEO of Allergan, in fact, got started in business because he had a very successful lawn mowing business with his twin brother, and in fact was a big factor on learning about business and why you don't want to hire your own friends to work for you. Right? So could you maybe talk about what there might be the passions that might have been from when you were young and how it's had an effect on you today?
So the sad reality is I flunked 3rd grade. So any of you who are having kids that are struggling in school, there is life after flunking school. But I had unbelievably supportive parents. And my parents, to give me some self-esteem after that, actually started me working. So they called on friends to employ me, and I worked in a ski shop. Starting shortly thereafter, I was the kid in the back room cleaning the equipment when it came back from rental. but it gave me and allowed me to have some self-esteem. It built a work ethic which has continues to this day. So I've come to value education for both myself, my kids, my wife, and a really strong work ethic. And so it has truly transformed the way I thought. And like I said, for kids, all of you probably have people in your family who struggle. If you put them in the right environment, they can still succeed. It also tells you you don't need much knowledge to work in PDM, I guess.
Well, by the way, I went to a speech that Warren Buffett's son, and he started out, and he put up on the screen Warren Buffett's school grades in the 7th grade, and he had terrible grades. And he had C's and D's and so forth, but he did get an A in typing, so obviously that was the key to his success. So switching to the industry side, though, I was really intrigued to learn a couple of things that you've been focused on. And one is a project called Bluefield Project, which took a very, very unique approach to R&D. And if you could, perhaps, if you could tell us sort of, first of all, what that project was and what was it able to do?
Yeah, so the Bluefield Project emanates out of the University of California, San Francisco, where I did my cardiology. There's the Gladstone Institute, and the Gladstone Institutes have these different institutes, one's for neurological disease. One of their projects is to come up with a cure for Alzheimer's, but the approach they're taking, which is being funded by a family, is for a genetic cause of Alzheimer's. So they gave us this very finite pool of money, and they said, you have a short period of time, you have a little bit of money, can you come up with treatments? And so we have accumulated some of the best minds in the country. We've taken a form of Alzheimer's that's relatively rare, that was not being studied at all. We're using it as a paradigm. We went from only a couple articles in the literature to now hundreds of articles in the literature. We now have 2 products in human testing, and so we've totally changed the paradigm by doing research. That is, we solve the IP issue so that we could get intra-university collaboration. So we have investigators across a huge number of institutions. They have to share their data on a weekly basis with each other so that the discovery cycle is really fast. The universities don't squabble over who's going to control the IP. We're now at the phase where we're working with several pharmaceutical companies. We're able to give them access to all these investigators, information, and IP, because the whole goal is to stay focused on coming up with a cure. And so we're really proud of the progress we've made. We have about 5 more years of funding ahead of us. But like I said, we have a timeline. We have families that are going to be dependent on us finding something that will help their children. And so we are really focused on bringing product into clinical trial to the marketplace. But one of the things we did, which was part of my contribution, is we reverse engineered the whole timeline of where we had to be at each milestone. If you want a product by a given year, when do you have to be at the FDA? When do you have to be transitioning from basic discovery to translational to clinical? So we've been hitting those timelines, and so we're pretty proud of the rapid progress we've made with very little money. So our total budget thus far has been about $75 million.
Is that a little bit like open source software, so forth? How is it similar and how is it different?
Yeah, so it's not as broad as open source. So it's limited distribution source, essentially. So, but it is getting more people under the tent, because as an investigator, I would tell you, I would guard all my intellectual discovery until I could present it at a meeting and get a publication and get my next grant. If you think about that cycle time, that is nuts. No company would ever run like that. And so we got to figure out, how do we help academia get out of that cycle? Because if they have all this pent-up knowledge, how do we accelerate bringing that to the world so that you can use it, which means you really got to solve these intellectual property issues and other things very early on so that they feel the freedom to share it before they present it at a meeting, get a paper published, or write the next grant.
Interesting. If we look a little more broadly about a related topic, as you reflect on how big pharma, especially pharma and biotech companies currently conduct R&D, and they don't have all the same approach, but there's some similarities. You know, as you observe, and of course you get to see from your position, get to see companies across the whole spectrum. What do you think is working and what isn't working?
Yeah, so I think that the biotech industry in the United States is extraordinary. The science in our country is spectacular. I think what's not working is for most of the major pharmas, their R&D departments. If you look at the last 100 products that came to the marketplace, about 70% of them were brought to the market, were introduced by a biotech company. Now, it may not have been brought to the market by the biotech company, but the biotech companies tend to follow science, and they let the discovery lead them to the next stage. Big pharma wants to have a portfolio. If I'm a diabetes company, I want my scientists to come up with something in diabetes. That limiting step actually is really restricting to them, so their cost of discovery for them tends to be sky high compared to the biotech guy who makes a discovery and then follows it. And so I think the new model has to be that big pharma is really spectacular at phase 3 regulatory commercialization, and they need to be offering those services, but the early introduction of products probably should come from the biotech companies. The data is pretty clear that the cost of capital, they're able to do it much cheaper, much faster, and so I think that's why you see the big pharmas really becoming M&A companies. They're looking to buy that stuff in early stages, then use their tools to get it to the marketplace. I think the other interesting thing you're seeing, and we were talking about this earlier, is that's why you're also having much higher success rates, is because you're getting things, the pharmas are buying the drugs when they've actually been able to see a clearer path to the market. And I think that's a great point.
Well, I'll be chatting a little bit about that when I give my speech on biotech and pharma M&A, but you're absolutely right.
I hope I didn't...
No, absolutely not. But you're absolutely right that they're very, very much tied to each other. Although the big pharma people are claiming that they're getting better at R&D, you know, for a while they were really on drugs. Some are. And so what would you recommend to them? Would you say, big pharma, why don't you just reallocate your budget and rather than spend R&D as much internally, try to devote it toward partnering and M&A? And what would you recommend to the big pharma company?
Yeah, so a couple things. One is I do believe that they should actually be looking to, they really got to assess what they're spending in their own R&D shops. And they have to be incredibly, it is very hard to kill your own kids. And so they have this conflict because they love their shops, but oftentimes the return on their shops are very poor. It's very hard for them to have the discipline there. The second thing is we have too many companies chasing the exact same targets. If you look at the number of ALK inhibitors we have for lung cancer, it's ridiculous. It means the price is actually too frothy because you can bring the 4th, 5th, 6th one out and still have a business model. Look at the number of people chasing PD-1s. We need pharma companies that are actually willing to look at other targets and other unmet medical needs. There is no lack of unmet medical need out there. And so we got to quit doing this thing where we're all, it's like watching your kids play soccer at an early age. It's bunch ball. They all chase the ball in the same direction. You need people spreading out over the field if we're going to be successful in meeting some of these unmet medical needs.
It's very interesting because a couple of years ago we had Fred Hassan, who was the CEO of Sharing Cloud, speak, and he had 2 points, which actually are actually dovetail with what you're talking about. One, he said, was size. Sometimes the bigger you are, the less effective you are. In fact, a lot of things, negative things happen with size. Right? Analogy is, put 5 chefs into a kitchen, they don't necessarily produce 5 times the number of meals. The other thing he said, and I just wonder if you agree with this, is that he said that there's a tendency of having silos within these large drug companies, and so a lot of sharing just doesn't happen that would actually be very effective. Do you agree with that, or not?
Yeah, well, Fred's a lot smarter than I am, and I actually have not worked within the confines of big pharma, so I would be probably stepping over my, getting a little too far over my skis to say much about what happens inside the walls of the pharma companies.
You talked about pricing, which of course is going to be a theme through a lot of the speakers here. How do you think this whole pricing battle is going to play out? Or is it hard to say?
I will speculate. So no crisis lasts forever, right? People get fatigued by this. And I will tell you that someday this will not be on the front page of the paper every day. The question is, how do we get to that point? And I think there are things that we can do as an industry. I think you brought up Brent Saunders. Brent recently went public with a pledge to not raise his prices by more than 10% in any given year. I think we are working right now with both people in biotech and pharma. We have got to figure out what the industry can do together to make consumers and payers feel more comfortable with our marketplace. We cannot afford to let this throw the baby out with the bathwater here. We have a great pharma and biotech industry in this country, and together we're going to have to work together to come up with a solution, and we got to come up with it soon because the patience is running out based for the payers and the patients, and so we've got to figure this out together. And like I said early on, we'd much rather have a system which the free market has agreed to work together than to force the federal government to actually dissolve this force. Because they don't want to do that, but if we leave it to them, they're going to have to do it because the voters demand it.
And unfortunately, history indicates that things as complicated as the drug industry and healthcare, very, very hard for legislators to come up with the right solution. Not because they don't want to try, but just because it's a very complicated ecosystem.
Yeah, most of you are familiar with 340B, the program for discounted drugs for poor people through the federally qualified clinics. That has been a disaster for almost everyone. Pharmaceutical companies and the biotech companies are giving enormous discounts. The discounts aren't getting passed on to the consumer. They're just allowing profitability to exist elsewhere. So it's bad for pharma, it's bad for payers, and it's not helping the intended patients. So it's well intended, but it's an example of a policy that's well intended but has become very misguided.
So last, I'd like to talk a little bit about Express Scripts. And all good companies realize that the world changes around them. And all good companies find a way to evolve to either get ahead of the changes or to make sure at least that they deal with the changes in a way that causes them to continue to be successful. And certainly Express Scripts and PBMs are no different. So how will the PBMs have to change in the future to deal with the kinds of industry changes and market changes that you talked about and some that you didn't talk about?
Yeah, so for Express Scripts, the asset we have is the following. We have 85 million members. We have $7 billion in profitability. That's a pretty enviable place to be. And we're just playing in the drug space, which is $350 billion. But remember, healthcare is a $3.3 trillion industry. And so we are looking at ways in which how do we get more into the healthcare spend than just drugs. So I'll give you a couple examples. Right now, we are actually doing live monitoring of patients' blood sugars through Wi-Fi-enabled glucose meters. This is really spectacular because if you think about it, when I was in practice, I would tell a diabetic, listen, keep this log. When you come back to see me, we'll go over your log together. Well, you would come in and I'd say, oh, you had a low blood sugar back here in August. How were you feeling that day? What did you eat? How much exercise did you get? You would look at me like I was a lunatic because you had no clue what you did that day. Now what happens is we're calling those patients when they have a low blood sugar within 2 minutes of the low blood sugar. And we're asking the patient, how do you feel? Do you need any assistance? Can I get anyone for you? But then, once we know the patient's safe, we're going through what did they eat? How much insulin did they take? How did they exercise? What we've been able to show is that we've actually been able to get the variations in blood sugars to come down, the hemoglobin A1Cs to come down, and we're keeping these patients out of clinics, out of hospitals, and out of the emergency rooms. And so this is us becoming almost disease managers. And I can do this with any Wi-Fi enabled device. I can do it with a right peak flow meter for respiratory disease. I can do it for diabetes. I can use a scale and a blood pressure cuff for patients with heart failure. And so we're going to be not only working in the pharma space, but we're going to be doing disease management light, and there's no one that has lighter weight rails than we can do it, and do it at the scale we can do it. We're not saddled with the expense of brick and mortar. So I can truly do virtual healthcare at an enormous scale. And so we're really excited about that. I have a colleague here, Patrick Lindsay. We're also looking at our 85 million members. How can we help you all do late-stage trials at a cheaper price so that we can get products into the marketplace and then keep patients who are on trials, getting them flipped to a paid benefit right away. And so we have things, so we're looking at lots of different opportunities to get into more of this, the flow of that $3.3 trillion spend, and not just the $350 billion sandbox debate.
You know, related to that, when I was preparing for this Fireside chat, I did a little homework, and then I was just amazed about how much effort Express Scripts has put into data analytics and innovation. And it's not the public image, right, of what Express Scripts does. But maybe if you could talk about that and just say, you know, talk a little bit about the work that you're doing in data analytics, but also in the innovation space.
Yeah. So I mentioned briefly in my comments how we had a predictive model for hepatitis C, but we've actually, because of the number of patients we have predictive model of adherence for almost any disease you can imagine, even those that have few patients in it because of the number of patients we have. The coolest thing I think we've recently developed is we can now predict if someone's likely to become addicted to narcotics with their first prescription for a narcotic. Now think about that. Instead of trying to get someone who's become a narcotic addict off of narcotics, how would you like the idea that you can target someone who actually has a high propensity and help them never become an addict? And so we're really excited about the opportunity to do that, because think about, if I reached out to the patient, I reached out to the doctor, and I didn't say that this person has a high propensity, I would just remind them, these are highly addicting drugs. You want to stay on them as short as possible. You want to take as few of them as possible. You want to consider alternatives like icing, ice or heat or whatever. But if you could give people alternatives so that they never become addicted to a drug, you could truly change this epidemic. So we believe that with our 85 million patients, the access to data we have, we can truly change the world when it comes to how people get their health care. So we really think this is a huge part of our future.
My last question before we turn it over to the audience to ask you some questions is, I also know that you really embarked on creating a chain of specialty pharmacies. Why are you doing this? How does that fit into the mission of Express Scripts, and does that also create some tensions on other parts of the system, right, and competitors, right?
So what he's referring to is we have these what are called therapeutic resource centers. We do not have general pharmacists anymore. We have every pharmacist assigned to one of 21 specialty areas. When a patient is treated by Express Scripts, because it's a virtual model, they speak to only pharmacists who are experts in their particular disease. Think about how you get health care today. You would never go to a generalist if you had cancer, cardiac disease, rheumatoid arthritis. You would want a specialist. Well, it really makes a difference when the whole team's specialists. I told you I was a transplant doctor. I could not imagine ever doing rounds without my transplant pharmacist. They made me a better transplant doctor. We had lower incidence of rejection. We had lower incidence of toxicity from these really potent drugs. And so we're giving consumers that same type of care no matter what their disease is. Now, obviously, some of the other pharmacies don't like this because we have data that shows if you get a specialty drug through retail versus our pharmacy, our adherence rates tend to be about 10% higher across every disease. You all may not realize this, but even for serious diseases like cancer, patients only take about 80% of their prescribed doses. For transplant, patients only take 80% of their prescribed doses. Think about that, how stupid that is. You've gotten the gift of life. And if you reject that organ, you may die, yet you only take 80% of your doses. We've been able to demonstrate that we can get about 10% higher adherence rates across almost any of these diseases by just having the act that you're being advised by specialists, nurses, doctors, and pharmacists. And we can do it on a really, really light frame because we're virtual. And so just like what Amazon's doing to the retailers, we think we're going to be able to do to the retailers also.
With that, let's open it up to questions, and I think it's a small enough room so that anyone who asks a question you'll be able to hear. So, Gil?
I'm Gil Oman from the University of Michigan, former CEO of our health system. Now doing computational medicine, bioinformatics, big data from the center. I wanted to focus on the last subframe of your overview slide where you mentioned cardiovascular, which was not part of the presentation.
Okay.
And specifically, statins, PCSK9 inhibitors, with many issues in this domain about value pricing and value payment, and emerging alternatives like the Spirion drug, which could be a much lower priced oral alternative. What's going on with the PCSK9 inhibitors?
Yeah, so great question. So PCSK9s are the first new drug in the lipid area in 30 years. And as you know, the science behind it, it's really spectacular. You had these families that had ultra-low LDLs. These families were essentially immune to heart disease and stroke, regardless of what they ate or how heavy they got. I mean, think about that. That's just extraordinary. So great scientists, Helen Hobbs and others, were able to discover the gene for this. They were able to help pharmaceutical manufacturers make an antibody, and so we can now do this artificially. The question is, will it work as well as the natural experiments? Will it actually prevent heart attacks and stroke? We know it lowers LDL really effectively. Lowers LDL, so if statins will lower your LDLs by 25%, these lower your LDLs by about 70%. The question is more LDL lowering actually going to make a difference? You're going to see a couple abstracts at the American Heart meetings, or the American College meetings next week, actually next Friday, or this Friday, I apologize. So Steve Nissen and others will be presenting abstracts this Friday that will give us a little more insight. Right now, the FDA has approved the drugs. They have a fairly narrow label. So, and because of the hassle factors that all the insurance companies, including us, have created, there are almost no scripts out there for these drugs. Very few scripts are being written for it. Most docs are waiting on it. It doesn't mean they wouldn't have used it if we didn't have these utilization management programs in place. But they're in place for a good reason. We are just letting people get access to them who meet the FDA label. Right now, the price is still relatively high. We have told both Sanofi, Regeneron, and Amgen that should the label expand, that they should be shown to be beneficial in bigger populations, we're going to have to talk about price again. Because again, if you think about the simple math of this, these drugs are out there, let's call them $10,000 a year. Unlike hepatitis, it's not a one-time drug, it's for life. There's 71 million people that have high cholesterol in the United States. If you just take the worst of the worst, the 15% that have had a heart attack or stroke or have familial hypercholesterolemia, that's still 10 million people. 10 million people times $10,000 is $100 million, $100 billion of new drug spend each and every year. So when I talk about drug spend going from 350 to 400 to 500, you can see why this will happen. And so this is actually going to be a real challenge for the payer community. But if it works, we got to figure out how we're going to support it. But we also got to figure out what the right price is. As you know, the ICER price for these is somewhere around $2,000. I don't think the companies are going to be able to keep the drug in the marketplace at $2,000, but the question is, what is that right price? Thanks for the question.
Yes?
Like Keith Nax from Hofjan, we're a CMO business. Thank you for the presentation. I admire to see the passion and the values coming through. You mentioned a number of 7,000 compounds in clinical development, and that's probably the pleasant hangover of great IPOs in 13 and 14. Might we have, in 2 or 3 years' time, a replay of 05, 06, 07, where there were very few phase 1 compounds, and I had no idea where to put my chemists to work? How do you see the pipeline going through?
Yeah, so, the pipeline is a function, no one knows exactly how the pipeline gets filled. That is, when people have tried to say, is it just capital flow? It's hard to correlate that it's just capital flow that fills up the pipeline. Part of it is also the cyclical nature of science, right? Much of this is we're harvesting the benefits of the Human Genome Project and all the things that spun off too. And so trying to make direct correlations. So will that pipeline get smaller again? I can guarantee you. I don't know why, but what goes up comes down, and so I suspect we're not in for continuing growth in the pipeline. But that's just speculation on my part. But are there tons of unmet medical needs and new targets being discovered, by the Human Biome Project? If you think about the unmet needs that we talked about with antibiotics, there are potentially a tremendous number of targets there. So we are not going to have a lack of a pipeline for lack of target. But I do agree with you. We've got to keep capital flowing to the sector. And so that's why part of this is really detrimental, because you have Bernie Sanders say one comment, and it takes billions of dollars out of the marketplace. You have a knucklehead like Steve Miller make one comment, it takes billions of dollars out of the marketplace. And so we don't want that. We got to have some stability for investors, because as you know, biotech and pharma have had these really big swings. You'd love for it to be smoother, but that volatility has been there for many, many years and will probably continue into the future. But we got to keep investment coming in, because there's still so much need that needs to be met. So I don't have a great solution for you, but I do know it will continue to be volatile.
I can make one comment, and that is, unfortunately, the pricing problem not only has had an effect on the companies themselves, but it's had an effect on the stock market and IPOs.
Right.
And I'll show a chart later that shows how there's been a severe drop in the valuations, but even worse for the biotech companies, the IPO market is really frozen. Not completely, really frozen. And that has robbed many of them of this tremendous positive cash flow that they were getting for a number of years. And that obviously is going to have an impact. Yeah.
Hi, Michael Felcher from Daxmore. My question is this: you speak about engaging with these different pharmas about pricing. So my question is, from your perspective, are you using a standard health economic metrics like quality adjusted life years, or some kind of other internal benchmark to try to have the conversation in a rational, systematic way? And also, do you look at days added differently between different indications? You gave there's 12 extra days in an oncology drug from one indication, versus lung cancer versus pancreatic cancer, or one class of drugs versus another. How rational and specific are you guys in terms of coming up with a metric benchmark so that the conversation can be consistent?
Yeah, so a great question. So I wish I could tell you I was that logical. We take in everything. We look at what's happening in the world markets. We look at what ICER's putting out there and other healthcare economists are putting out there. We take in the data for all the pharmaceutical companies, and we work with them in an iterative way. What we can do for pharma, which is what we've offered to do, is say, you're looking at it from just your NASH product. I have a broader view of what's coming to the marketplace, and I know how much more my payers are going to be able to pay next year. And so we can give you clues as to what we think the market will be able to absorb when you bring a product into the marketplace. I'll give you an ironic discussion. We've had lots of discussions with Gilead, revisiting what could have gone differently if we hadn't gotten into our TIF over hepatitis drugs. I will tell you that if they had brought the product in at 65, for instance, the market would not have batted an eye. Now, why didn't they do that? Well, what happened was, remember that the historic treatment for hepatitis C was interferon and ribavirin, and that was about $30,000, and it was crappy treatment. No one could tolerate it, no one got treated, no one wanted the treatment. You then had Victrellis and Alisio come out, they were at $65,000, and we never commented about it because there were no scripts for it, because you had to use it with interferon also. And so what they did is they actually, so they took a premium off of what we thought was an ill-gotten premium. We thought they should have come out at a premium of what was being used in the marketplace instead of a premium on a premium that was ill-deserved, right? They looked at it as they need to have a premium over what was in the market at 65. And so that's why they came out at 84. Remember that Pharmacies actually was going to bring the product to the marketplace at 36. So that data was out there. So the point being is that we don't want to drive you guys to zero. We have no desire for you not to make money. We want you to have robust, successful companies, but we want to help you in trying to just inform you what we think the market will tolerate. You can still make your own decision as to what you want to launch your drug at, but we are more than happy to share with you our opinions and to help you get out there successfully. But it's not as rational as, we have our own, qualities or ICER or something like that.
Well, we're running about 20 minutes behind, which, for the first speech, we're doing quite well. So. But I'm sure during some of the breaks, if you have questions for Dr. Miller, I must say there's a reason why I run behind, because your speech was excellent and very, very helpful. So thank you very much. Please join me in thanking Dr.